everyone. Welcome to the Copy Chat Show. My name is Todd Jones. I'm the host and the owner of Copy Flight. And on the Copy Chat Show, we talk about copywriting, content marketing in a world of digital marketing, which we all pretty much are a part of. And I'm pretty excited about the guest today. This is Donata from Termageddon. And she told me I didn't have to try to pronounce her last name, so I'm thankful for that. But I'm glad to have her on. And Donata, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Hi, Todd. It's really nice to be here. And thank you, everybody, for listening. As Todd said, my name is Donata. I have an unpronounceable last name, but I'm an attorney, and I work in privacy and technology law. And I'm the president of Termageddon, which generates privacy policies, terms of service, and other policies for websites and applications. I am the chair of the International Association of Privacy Professionals Chicago chapter and the newsletter editor for the e-privacy committee of the American Bar Association.
I'm not sure. We've had some pretty smart people on this show before, but Donata could be the smartest one we've ever had on. That's saying a lot. So
I'm not confirming that title at all. Definitely not the smartest one here.
Well, she's definitely well accomplished, and having a lawyer on the show, I'm sure we'll get all of our law questions answered in 30 minutes. But okay, so we're going to get to the getting to know you lightning round. And as I told you before we started, I did change up the questions a bit, so you got to be on your toes. So you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay. Who is your hero?
I would say probably my fiance's mom. So she was the first female neurosurgeon to graduate out of Mayo Clinic. And she's also like one of the nicest people you'll ever meet. So she's extremely competent when it comes to her job, but can still hold your hand in the operating room. So she's awesome.
Wow. Okay. That's Tanja's mom?
Yes. Yeah.
That's awesome. I have a great appreciation for healthcare professionals, especially nurses, but that's awesome. So,
yeah,
okay.
She's a really cool lady.
What motivates you to work hard?
I don't know. I've always had this motivation to work hard ever since I was little. I think, so I was raised by my grandparents in Lithuania, and my grandparents taught me that, there's nothing more important in their opinion than education and working hard. And I feel like that kind of translated towards the rest of my life. And I kind of hear their voice in the background saying, "What are you doing? Taking a nap? It's time to go back to work."
Yeah, I think we all have a little bit. And when you're raised that way, you are especially sensitive to that. So
Yes.
I know my mom still struggles with that. She's long, past her working days, but she still hears her mom in the back of her voice, in the back of her head, trying to get her to do stuff as well. So next question. If you could choose to do anything for a day, what would it be?
I would probably, well, does this have to be career related or just in general, I could do anything for a day?
Anything.
Okay, I would probably just work in my garden for a day because the weeds are taking over and it's time to do some planting. So if I had a complete day off, I could just do whatever I wanted, I would probably go there.
You really enjoy doing that?
I do. It's really fun. I'm not good at it by any means. Almost half of my plants will die, but I do enjoy it. So.
Yeah, we tend to think about plants as not having personality or anything like that, but they do really. Right. My mom refers to hers as her babies, so I totally understand that. Favorite holiday?
So since I'm Lithuanian, my favorite holiday is what's called John's and Jane's Day. It's on June 24th, which also happens to be my birthday. And it's a national holiday. So everybody gets the day off. And it's actually, it kind of moved back from pagan times. So you'll have very large bonfires by the beach and, lots of food and drinks and fun. So that's my favorite holiday by far.
That sounds nice. I like that. I would imagine the summers there
It's
are not
really
as.
fun.
I would imagine the summers there are not as hot as like the South in America.
It's not as humid, which makes things a lot easier. But there would be like months of preparation for John and Jane's Day of building like large fires, and sometimes they'll be in like different shapes and stuff. It's really fun.
Okay, learn something new every day. I'll have to look that up. Okay, let's see. I asked. This is a different version of another question, I guess. If money was no object, what would you do all day? You can't answer gardening. You've already done that. So.
I would probably do my job. I actually really enjoy it. It sounds bizarre, but I actually really enjoy reading laws and interpreting them and figuring out regulations and what's changed and what hasn't. So I think I would keep my job because to me, I have the perfect job. So I think I would just do what I do now.
We'll talk more about that in a little bit. If you could live anywhere, where would it be?
I would probably live in my exact house, like a replica of my house, maybe like 50 miles into the Indiana border. We live in Illinois now, and so we're subject to crazy taxation. If we're just 50 miles into Indiana, I'd be very happy.
You like Indiana pretty good?
Yeah, it's a nice place.
I think there's a lot
beautiful.
I think there's a lot of similarities with Indiana and Arkansas.
Yes.
I went to Indiana once.
Sure.
I had some friends that lived there. We went up there and visited. I felt like I was, pretty much in Arkansas, just, north. So a lot of similarities.
Hunt says that Indiana is like Lithuania, just with more fast food places.
Well, that's America for you, right?
Yeah.
What influencer would you like to meet for a cup of coffee or tea?
So because I'm a lawyer, I would actually really like to meet Trevor Hughes. I have met him once, but I would like to meet him again. And Trevor Hughes is the president of the International Association of Privacy Professionals. So he's definitely a very, very cool and interesting guy who knows a lot about privacy. So I'd love to meet him again.
Sounds like a great cocktail conversation.
Yes,
privacy
it
laws
is.
For those who are into that, probably would be.
Yes.
It's like a bunch of coders sitting around talking about coding I get
right.
Okay. Do you collect anything?
We actually, so maybe half a year ago, we started collecting magnets for our fridge from all the places we've been to. So we got like 6 or 7 magnets, and now we can't because we don't travel anywhere. But once all of this is over, I'm hoping to continue my magnets collection.
So what do you do when you run out of space on the refrigerator?
I've seen people buy like a magnet board and, stick it up to their wall. So maybe I'll do that. My fridge is pretty decent size though, so it'll take me a while to fill it completely up.
Okay. I worked at a bookstore for a while, and it seemed like we sold these little magnets that you could turn into words. And some of them even had like Shakespeare phrases and that kind of stuff. So I guess for the literary nerd.
Cool.
Now, somebody could do that for like famous laws, maybe. And that would be, you have a new side hustle. There you go.
Yes. Just set up shop right now.
Well, that's one of those things that once you make them, you just sell them. You keep selling them. You don't have to like do something with it every day. So yeah,
that's true. But if new laws pass, then I would have to constantly just keep making magnets.
Well, they don't happen as often, for like famous laws, it's got to be something that, stands the test of time kind of deal.
That's true.
Do you have a personal motto?
My personal motto would be, don't let perfect be the enemy of done. I feel like sometimes I can get really bogged down into the minutia of things and trying to make something that's super perfect, and there's not always time for that.
Yeah.
Don't let perfect be the enemy of done, I would say.
I like that. I can do the same thing with any content I produce. It's got to be perfect. It's got to be perfect. Well, no, you actually got to get it out the door. So
Yeah, exactly.
I hear you. Okay, last one. Ready?
Yes.
Do you have any famous distant relatives or friends?
Uh, Not really. I would say famous in terms of like the tech space. I'm friends with Kyle Van Dusen and Matt Serbert from the Admin Bar.
Mm-hmm.
That's about as famous as my friends get.
Well, now you probably know WPL Nation guy, Troy
Yeah,
Dean.
Troy Dean.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I met
I,
him.
I
Yeah,
would
he's
put that. I
cool.
would put him up there as well.
For sure. For sure.
Okay. All right. Let's get started on our discussion. Now, as Donata said, Termageddon helps you create privacy policies and terms for your websites and applications. And I wanted to bring her on and talk about this because this is becoming more and more important each day for those that have websites, which is pretty much anybody now. What changes that has happened recently in the last few years that requires more awareness regarding privacy policies, and why do we need a service like Termageddon?
Yeah, of course. So everybody listening, unless like you've been living under a rock, probably remembers the Cambridge Analytica scandal. So where Facebook shared data with a third-party tool without authorization. And that's what really spurred the whole privacy conversation. So in the European Union, they've been talking about privacy for a while, about guaranteeing individuals the right to privacy. You know, Australia and Canada had privacy laws before then, but really in the United States, what spurred all of these changes was the Cambridge Analytica scandal. And that scandal was so famous that a lot of consumers started to realize what is happening to their personal information online. And they started to realize that that information is used, that information is disclosed, that information is sold. And what they did was talk to their legislatures and say, you know what, maybe this is not okay anymore. We kind of turned a blind eye to this, but you know what, we don't feel comfortable doing so anymore. And ever since then, we've seen more and more states propose and pass privacy bills. So, for example, California proposed and passed the California Consumer Privacy Act, which went into effect January 1st of this year. And then we also have Nevada that amended their existing privacy law. And now we have over 12 states that have proposed their own privacy bills. And each of these privacy bills has their own requirements for who they apply to, you know, who needs a privacy policy, what does that privacy policy need to disclose, what are the privacy rights given to consumers. And if you think about it as a small business, you might have had a privacy policy in the past and you never had to look at it again. And that was that. Like you just put it on your site and you were set. And unfortunately, that's not the case anymore because we're seeing all these new privacy laws and privacy bills. Now, if you think about it as a small business owner, do you really have the time to keep track of all of that? Right? Do you have the time to read every single bill, every single time it's changed, how it passes, what the attorney general say about it, what the guidance is? That's really a lot of requirements on businesses. So what Termageddon does is we keep track of those requirements for you, and we'll change your privacy policy when new privacy laws go into effect, meaning that you can actually just continue running your business, continue running your website, and not have to worry about getting hit with privacy fines or lawsuits, because some states are even proposing that consumers can sue businesses of any size for collecting personal information without having a privacy policy.
And some of us talk about, and I've had this conversation with Rob and Devinder, some other people, um, and people locally as well. We have a big database company in town that has collected information for years, and your Facebook, your YouTube, your Twitter, all these applications that we use. That's what they are. They're applications. Social media. Um, you get to use for free, and the the price for doing that is your information, your data. Those of us who've been
Right.
around in this space for a while understand that. I mean, it's like, you see people on Facebook complaining about the information being like, they've been using that ever since you signed up. And of course, they probably didn't read the fine print, which I probably didn't either. Um, how does that play into what we're dealing with the privacy policies, or is that a separate issue?
Well, I think what a lot of consumers didn't necessarily realize is who that data was going to be shared with, right? So, and there was a lot of things that were hidden at the time. So,
Mhm.
for example, on a lot of websites back in the day, you could potentially scroll through 5 or 10 pages to actually get to the privacy policy.
Mhm.
Or it was in really small text,
Mhm.
or you had to request it, or you just download an app and it doesn't ask you to agree to a privacy policy. It just says, oh, you downloaded, that means you agreed, but you never actually saw it. So it wasn't necessarily that consumers were just ignoring these things. I think that at the time, it was something that they were not made aware of properly by companies, which is why a lot of privacy laws will now state how a privacy policy needs to just be displayed as well.
Yeah, so you're talking about the difference in transparency and maybe being veiled a little bit. We don't really want you to know what we're doing with your information, so we're going to hide it from you. And basically, the laws that have caught up are basically trying to make companies be more transparent with the information they collect. Is that correct?
Exactly, yeah. So, for example, under some older privacy laws, you don't have to disclose whether or not you sell the data that you collect. In the more modern ones, you do have to disclose that. So back in the day, even if you read the privacy policy, top to bottom, you wouldn't have been told whether your information is sold, whereas now you might be required to.
One of the things that I think that makes having a privacy policy on a site, and I've generated a few of these because of sites over the years. I think it makes it more complicated is the fact that we use third-party apps with our site. So Google Analytics, for instance, um, you have to account for that somehow. Um, Maybe some other third-party application you're using to do something on your site. I'm guessing we have to account for that in our privacy policy somehow, or is
So it really depends on what laws apply to you. But for example, Google Analytics, their terms of service actually requires you to have a privacy policy. So when you install Google Analytics, you agree to their terms of service. That means you're agreeing to have a privacy policy on your website.
right?
And things like Google Analytics do collect what's called personal information because they will collect IP address and browsing history and things like that. What I see a lot of businesses get stumped by is the sharing of data. So I help a lot of people to create their privacy policies, right? And one of the questions that I'll ask is, do you share data? And the first thing they tell me is no. I do not share data. I have never shared data. They're almost offended that I would ask them. But you have to realize that a lot of websites do share data. So for example, if you have an email newsletter sign up form, you might be sharing that data with MailChimp. You might be sharing that data with Constant Contact. That is considered sharing data, and you need to disclose that in your privacy policy. One thing that I see a lot of people be confused by is some privacy policies will disclose the actual names of the companies with which you share data.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, they will say MailChimp or Constant Contact,
Mm-hmm.
and other privacy policies will do categories of third parties. So for example, email marketing tools.
Mm-hmm.
And under the General Data Protection Regulation, which is the European Union privacy law, and under United States laws, under Canadian and Australian laws, you can disclose the categories instead of the actual names. So you don't have to go through and list every single email marketing service that you use. You can just say email marketing service, and that's completely acceptable too.
That's a good thing because sometimes we change those things. I might be using MailerLite today and get to a point where I feel comfortable using something like Drip or Active Campaign, next year. And so
Right.
I won't have to go back in and change that.
Exactly. And that way you don't have to go back and forth through your privacy policy, changing things. And it also helps keep your privacy policy shorter as well, and less confusing to users, which is definitely a positive in my opinion.
And CRM, so if you're using, say, the HubSpot free CRM, is that something you have to put in there as a category as well? Do you have to say what CRM you're using?
Yeah, you can just say CRM, right? You don't necessarily have to say HubSpot or Salesforce. You can just say CRM. And that's something that a lot of people get kind of tripped up by as well. And I would say another thing that people get tripped up by is that privacy laws start applying to you when you collect the personal information, not when you share it, not when you sell it, not when you use it. It's when you collect it. So if you have a contact form that collects name, email, phone number, address, that kind of stuff, you are collecting personal information. And that's the point at which you should be saying to yourself, okay, I need to have a privacy policy.
Yeah, and so that's a good point. And that was one of the questions I was going to ask you is, when do, I'm sure you talk to people all the time and they're like, I don't need a privacy policy. And then you point out, oh, well, you have a contact form. If you have a contact form, because why do you have a website if you don't have a contact form?
Yeah, exactly.
Anyway, that's for another. In fact, I have a whole talk about anyway. Uh, but if you have a contact form, which I hope you do on your website, because you're trying to get people to contact you to do business with you, whether you're as service-based businesses, okay, you have the product-based businesses, and it's more e-commerce based, and I guess that's a whole nother topic that probably falls under this as well. But I guess the two most basic things I'm thinking about is if you have a comment or a contact form and you have an email newsletter, you need to have a privacy policy. Is there any reason you would not need a privacy policy on a website?
So you don't need a privacy policy on a website that does not collect personal information. So if you don't have a contact form, if you don't have an email newsletter form, if you don't use analytics, if you don't use cookies, like if your website does not do any information collection whatsoever, that's the only point at which you should be fine.
And I'm not sure I've ever seen a website like that.
I haven't either. I've seen websites without contact forms, but they will always have Google Analytics installed.
Sure. Or something, yeah. We used to
Yeah.
do stat counters 15 years ago,
Okay.
But that was back before, I think that was even before Google Analytics was out. So, and there's a number of other kinds of stat counters or analytic counters that are out there actually. So yeah, I would think even if you didn't have a contact form or a email sign up form, you usually have some kind of analytics installed. To be
Right.
honest with you, having launched many websites over the years, your host probably has some kind of data information for stats in this suite that you may not even realize is there. So that would probably qualify you for needing a privacy policy, wouldn't it?
Yes, definitely. If you are collecting personal information of any kind, that's when you need to have it.
So what we've established is if you have a website, 99.999% of the time, you need to have a privacy policy, right? So what are some consequences people would have, everyday people? I mean, obviously, I think somebody had a big fine a while back. It was a large corporation. So if I'm a small, medium-sized business, if I break a privacy policy law, what kind of consequences would I expect?
So there's two types of consequences, and number one would be fines, which can range from $2,500 per violation. And per violation means per website visitor whose privacy rights you infringed upon, to 20 million euros in total or more. It's actually interesting because, we're saying, a lot of people say that they haven't seen small companies being fined. And when you look at the news, that's true, right? When you look at like New York Times and BBC or whatever, you'll only see the large fines. But if you actually look up, if you have the time, Google search GDPR enforcement tracker, and you will see over 200 cases of when GDPR was enforced. And a large number of those cases are actually against small businesses. So we've seen small restaurants, small grocery stores. We've seen marketing companies get fined. There's recently a marketing company that was fined like over 100,000 euros for changing the email of their particular customer in their CRM without that person's permission. So you actually see a lot of small businesses being fined, even if they weren't getting fined $20 million or something like that. As a small business owner myself, I would really not like to shell out $100,000 because I changed somebody's email. The second, and as more privacy laws are passed in the United States, as consumer interest in this increases, we'll see more and more fines being pushed out. So for example, the California Consumer Privacy Act, that was the enforcement date for that is July 1st of 2020. Now some groups have contacted the Attorney General asking, hey, can we push back the enforcement date because of COVID? And he said no. So it's something that's not going away regardless of the status of the world right now, which I find interesting. But there's also a second set of consequences there, and that's losing customers. So there was recently a study that came out that said 52% of Americans will not use a product or a service if they feel like it has privacy violations or if they feel like their privacy isn't safe. That's about half. So half of your potential customers could be leaving. And then there was another study showing that the average sales delay that is caused by privacy concerns is about 7.8 weeks. So your sales cycle could potentially be delayed just because you failed to have a privacy policy, because it's something that consumers look at now. It's not just something that lawyers look at. It's not something that just state attorney generals look at. It's something that consumers look at and read now, which is interesting because 5 years ago, nobody read a privacy policy. They just clicked, I agree. But now people will actually look for it, read it, make sure that they feel safe and secure. It's kind of like the SSL certificate, right? Like a few years back, it was nice to have on some e-commerce websites, and now Google won't let you access a website without an SSL certificate, without making you feel like you're jumping into like some nasty, gross pond, right? So I think something similar is starting to happen with privacy as well.
Yeah, we're in, of course, business is online now. I mean, we're in a world when it comes to business, which consumer wants some transparency about things. So that's definitely something to consider. Now, I want to ask you, I was just thinking about this when you were talking about the marketing company being fined in Europe. Anybody working in marketing, and that could be any kind of content creator, content marketing, copywriters, web developers, digital marketing agencies, anything in that general marketing bucket, do they have more opportunity to make a mistake with this because they manage so many clients' websites? Is that something that they really should pay attention to a little bit more and partner with somebody like a Termageddon?
So I used to work at a software development company way before this. And in reality, the way I see the relationship between an agency and a client, it really depends on your contract and your relationship with your client. So for example, if you have a contract that says, we will build you a compliant website, rip that up right now because you're going to end up being responsible for privacy law compliance for that website. Make sure that your contracts are airtight on that. Make sure that your clients understand that you're not responsible for compliance. Make sure that your clients understand that they're responsible for how they handle data, how they collect, how they use, how they disclose it, how they destroy it. And if there's something that your client wants you to do on that particular website, make sure that you get it in writing. I know with a lot of marketing and development professionals, this is a complicated topic, right? But the truth is you don't have to be a privacy attorney to have that conversation with your clients. So when you're building them a contact form, when you're running an email newsletter campaign, when you're doing marketing for them, it's a great time to talk to them and to say, hey, it looks like you're collecting personal information. I'm not a privacy lawyer, but I think that you should get a privacy policy on your website and look into what your compliance requirements are, and make sure that you do that in writing, because as we see more and more privacy lawsuits coming out, we'll see more and more companies blaming somebody else for their faults.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, it's up to the website owner to make sure that that website is compliant, not to the agency. But as we see here in the United States, litigation is very common. If somebody gets sued for $500,000, they might be trying to come back to you and say, well, this guy built it. He said he knew what he was doing, and it turns out that he didn't, so it's not my fault. So make sure that you talk to your clients about it. Make sure you tell them that they need a privacy policy, and make sure that you do so in writing and really protect yourself and your agency for the future.
Yeah, I think it should be in the onboarding, or even not even in the onboarding, but the pre-qualify questions, like, that's a good point. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And we partner with agencies. So we actually have a website policies waiver that we do offer to our agency partners. That basically is a addendum to your contract that you would have your client sign, saying, we're not responsible for privacy law compliance. You need to make sure that you have a privacy policy, that you keep it up to date. But at Termageddon, we partner with agencies. So we give them a free set of our policies so you can test it out, see if you like it, put it on your own agency's website, get protected that way. And then we offer recurring revenue for referrals.
Yeah, that's very good. I have another question, but it should be for later, not on the show.
Okay.
Yeah, I've yet to try out your service as well as I should at this point. I need to go in and actually make a privacy policy for my website. You're talking about compliance brings up another question that I didn't expect to do in this show, but I just got through I'm in the middle of a 2-part article writing about Colleen Greatzer. I said her name correctly, and she is a consultant for people who need to have accessible websites, accessibility issues. How does that play into privacy policies? It seems like some similar stuff going on, like, unless the client, maybe she might even say, and I would have to talk to her about this, but she might even say, if you're building a website, you should just automatically make it accessible. She does accessibility audits, so people will come to her, but does that play into privacy policy much? There's some similarities there, I think.
So I'm not an accessibility expert, so I can't speak too much in depth about it. But the way that I understand the relationship between the two, right? So privacy laws are pretty clear, right? Here are the requirements that you need to meet. Here's what your privacy policy needs to contain. Now, relatively clear. You'll probably need a lawyer to parse it out, but you can parse it out and get to something that's good, right? Accessibility is something that is much more nebulous in my mind. There are requirements as to what needs to happen, but people are still very unclear as to whether those are real requirements or suggestions. And as the internet changes, as websites change, as design practices change, it seems like it's a very unclear situation of what's happening in that world. A lot of websites will have an accessibility statement. And I do want to note that just because you have a statement does not mean that your website is compliant. So with privacy policies, having a privacy policy is also part of a myriad of requirements that privacy laws impose. But it's definitely a great first line of defense, right? So you go to a website, a consumer sees a clear privacy policy, the likelihood that they will complain because your privacy policy is there is a lot lower than for a website that doesn't have it. When it comes to accessibility, it seems like people and lawyers are paying a lot more attention to the actual operation of the website and not to what an accessibility statement says.
Yeah.
So I think that's an interesting difference that I see.
They both have legal ramifications, but I guess two
Yes.
sides and maybe not even the same coin for that matter. But that's the thing. That's the world we're getting into now. So I've expected to see more, and there's starting to be some lawsuits regarding accessibility,
Yes.
especially with government websites. That's something I've seen coming for a long time. And if you're listening to this and you are operating a government website, it needs to be accessible. That's just no other way I can say that. You will likely get fined at some point or sued.
Yes.
Sued, I should say. Certainly, you should have a privacy policy as well. Okay, we talked about consequences a little bit. So one of the things you and I talked about in a previous conversation was, and you asked me if I wanted to talk about just the United States or globally, and I said globally because this is not just the United States or just a Europe thing. Um, we've talked a little bit about how many states have privacy policy. I know California probably has the biggest presence in that area. What other
So,
states?
yeah, California has two. We also have Nevada and Delaware. So it's four right now. But we have over 12 states that have proposed their own privacy bills. So, for example, I live in Illinois.
Mm-hmm.
Illinois has 3 different proposed bills.
Mm-hmm. So we could go from 4 to 16 pretty quick.
Yes, because so what happened in the European Union is you had all of these countries come together and they came out with one set of directions, right? So you have the GDPR in Europe, and that's what applies to businesses there. Over here, it looks like the federal government has been unable to pass a privacy law that would apply in every single state. And because consumers are asking for it, each state is kind of taking the reins into their own hands and saying, okay, well, the federal government won't do this. We're going to do it instead. And what that is going to create is a patchwork of laws, because the laws protect consumers of a particular state, not the businesses. So they have a very wide application. So just because you're not located in Nevada does not mean that the law doesn't apply to you. So if you have a customer in Nevada, the law will apply. So if you think about it, if you think about all of the states, and if each of the states has its own requirements, and you can have website visitors from any state submit their information, that will create a very extreme patchwork of different laws. And in my opinion, it will become something that's almost impossible for a small business to keep track of and comply with themselves.
Do you think at some point that all these different state laws will somehow push the federal government to come up with an overarching law, or we'll just have 50 different laws or plus?
Anything is possible, I would say. But even if we do eventually get a federal law, so most privacy professionals agree that we won't see a federal privacy law get passed for at least another 2 or 3 years. So what are you going to do in those 2 or 3 years? But then when a federal law is passed, there are 2 choices that the legislation can make. So choice number 1, it preempts state laws. So that means that if a state has a stronger privacy law, the federal privacy law will apply instead. Or 2, it does not preempt state laws, which means that you would have to comply with the federal law and the state law at the same time in the same place, which would create an even more complicated framework to work with.
Okay, now that, I didn't know that I would ever talk about this on the show, but it reminds me of the cannabis situation. So
yes,
I have a couple of friends that work in that industry, helping people with websites and copy. And I can't imagine, I mean, kudos to them for diving in and doing it. And that's great. I do know that they've had trouble with getting POS because banks won't do it at all.
right.
And because it's against the federal, right?
Yes.
But then in certain states, it's perfectly legal and there's a disconnect. So I can see that, it can be similar with the privacy policy, I suppose.
Exactly. And when you think about people who work in the cannabis industry, they will usually have 2 or 3 attorneys on staff or on retainer who are constantly keeping track of these requirements. And that's something, cannabis companies are usually well funded. And a lot of small businesses aren't. So a lot of small businesses can't afford to pay thousands of dollars a month for something like privacy law compliance when, you know, you have to pay salaries, you have to pay you have to pay for your building and phones and computers and internet and all of that. You know, that's just a very, very high requirement, I would say, that's being imposed.
Okay, this brings me to the next impromptu question. This is
Okay.
why I do it like this, because no matter what I have on the sheet, something else comes up and it's more important. So let's say I'm small business in Indiana, and I get a privacy policy. My web developer, you know, connects me with you, and I'm paying $10 a month, whatever your payment is, and you make me a privacy policy. Does that live directly on my website, or is that something that you refresh regularly from your website? How does that work?
So it comes with an embed code, and then the embed code is placed on the website, and that's what allows us to control the copy. So when there is a new law that has passed, we either push the update automatically to you, or we'll ask you to answer one or two more questions and then push the update automatically. So for example, when Nevada's privacy law was amended, it started asking for disclosures to whether or not you sell the personal information that you collect. Obviously, we can't answer that question for you because that's, you know, from your business, you would know, we wouldn't. So we just sent an email asking that one question, you replied yes or no, and then we push the update.
So you don't have to regenerate the embed code or anything like that?
That's correct, yeah.
That's okay. That's good
Yep.
to know. Okay, that kind of answers my question. Now, kind of get back to the globally thing. And this is one of the questions that the vendor asked, and it's kind of along the lines of what we've been talking about. So how do you keep up with all these laws from the United States, Canada, Europe? I would imagine Australia has their own.
Yes, it
Uh,
does.
in what countries, who do you have to keep up with? I know we talked about the states in the United States, and then Canada, of course, they have their own, and Europe, which takes care of Europe, and I guess you have Australia has their own, and then you have Asia, maybe Russia. I don't know. So who do you have to keep up with, and how do you do that?
So personally, what I keep up with is all of the states, Canada, European Union, and Australia. Those are really the places that we're focusing on right now. And the way I do that is through a few different pieces of software. So number one, it's called LexisNexis, which is like a Google for lawyers. So I've set up certain search terms, and every day I'll get a set of emails, you know, here are the cases in these particular districts that concern those topics. Here are some of the proposed bills that are coming out. Here's where they are. Here's any updates on where they are in the process. Another software that I use is Legiscan. So Legiscan is actually great for keeping track of new bills and new regulations. So usually when a new privacy law comes out, a state attorney general will release regulations as to how to comply with that law. Fun fact, sometimes they're conflicting with the actual law, so that's fun. In terms of outside of the United States, so for example, the European Union has the Data Protection Board. It has data protection authorities, which come out with decisions about how to interpret certain things in GDPR. I'll get alerts from those. The Information Commissioner's Office in the UK is an amazing resource for keeping track of GDPR and decisions and all of that. Europe also has what's called an Article 29 working party, which interprets GDPR. Information commissioners' offices in Australia and Canada, they have a main information commissioner there, and their website releases updates on new cases and things like that as well. And then I also use the International Association of Privacy Professionals as a resource. So if I ever have a question about a law, so for example, for California law to apply, you have to do business in California. And that sounds like the easiest thing ever, like you just do business in California, right? It took like about 50 attorneys to figure out what that actually means. So I actually have a list of people that I reach out to on a regular basis if I ever have questions about the law or about a case. And the IPP also has a state privacy bill tracker, a federal bill tracker. They have a robust news area where I can learn about new bills as well. And they also have some really great like virtual conferences and talks that I watched about how to interpret the law as well. So it all kind of comes from a whole bunch of different sources. It's not just like, you know, I go to one website and I see everything I need to know. It actually spans through like 10 different places that I gather all of my information from.
So you were like Google Alerts for privacy law.
Pretty much, yeah, except like if you had Google Alerts for privacy law, just that term, you'll probably get like 50 trillion alerts, none of which would be relevant. So it's a lot more complicated than that. Like you have to actually make alerts by each law. And then most of the time they don't make it to the news. So then you have to, you know, scour down in the depths of the internet.
I use that metaphorically because I noticed all the sources you mentioned, none of them were Google, but
Yeah.
you become like Google Alerts for privacy laws for the rest of us, I guess you might say.
Well, by the time it ends up in Google, it's like 2 months too late. Like I need to know about a law like 6 months before, at least before it passes. You know, I can't, if I know of it the day of passing, I'm already way too late because I had to update our clients' policies and we have thousands of them. So usually when an update comes, I'll find out about a law when it's first proposed, and then I'll track it. And then, you know, when it passes, in between when it passes and the effective date, we have to re-engineer our systems. So it's pretty much crunch time between pass time and effective date of, you know, me engineering everything and then our development team building it out.
Okay, you said you had thousands you have to update. I mean, once the law comes out, I guess it depends on, like, it could be just Australia you have to update. So then you have to find all the clients from Australia. Is that a one-by-one type deal, or?
So we do have a database of our customers where we can pull where somebody is located. Actually, interesting fact though, so let's say we'll have a privacy law come out. It's not just, you know, we update it once for that particular privacy law and then it's good to go for forever, right? As long as that law goes into effect. That's actually not the case because we'll also see Attorney General regulations which interpret the law. And then we'll also see case law that interprets the law. So for example, we can see cases by particular district across the United States. We can also pull up cases across the world that says, if your privacy policy says this, it's incorrect. Or if your privacy policy doesn't have that particular disclosure written in that particular way, it's incorrect. So I'll actually pull cases as well. And as new cases come in throughout time, we'll actually update those policies again to make sure that the wording complies with what courts have decided.
I'm glad it's you and not me. That is a very valuable service. I have one more question.
Sure.
And then again, this comes from our friend Devinder, and I'm sure you're going to add a lot of caveats to this, but I'll just say it like he said it because I don't know of a softer way to say it, but are your privacy policies 100% legal proof? Do they give guarantees?
Okay, so nothing.
And I'm not sure if that's the right way to answer a question.
Yeah, of course. So nothing is ever guaranteed. If I go to an attorney right now and I get a privacy policy written for me, I don't get a guarantee, even though I paid $5,000. Actually, one of my friends had a privacy policy written for him by a really, really large law firm, and he asked me to review it. And I did, and it turns out that it was not compliant with Canada, Australia, or the US because he was based in the UK. And only after asking all of those questions of his attorney was he informed that we can make no guarantees that these laws are, that the privacy policy that we wrote is correct or even usable. And also, we can't control what you put in as the answers. So for example, if you do sell data and in our system, when you're filling out that question, you say that you don't, and then later on you get sued because you actually do sell data and you decided to lie, we can't really guarantee that because we can't guarantee what you're going to be putting into the policy. What I can say though, is you can find what privacy laws state that a privacy policy needs to contain. So we have those blogs on our blog even, and you can read those and you can cross-check it. So you're more than welcome to cross-check it. And we actually have a lot of attorneys using our system as well, with pretty much no changes. So I don't know, it's the best work that I can do. That's all I can tell you.
Yeah, guarantees and that kind of stuff, really hard to make guarantees in anything.
Right.
Maybe, and most people don't. I guess I don't know. It just seems hard to make a guarantee on anything. But
I mean,
I
even if
guess
you,
really the ideal for a business owner is the cost enough to compensate for mitigating what risk I have. If why would I use Termageddon versus the local lawyer in my town?
yeah, so before we go into that, I was also going to say, like, if you're building a website, do you guarantee to your client that that website will be up forever, that that website will never get hacked? No, because, people just can't make those guarantees. There's
Right.
just a lot
Too many
more going
variables.
on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and in terms of like using your local attorney, if you can afford an attorney, we definitely encourage you to do so. If you think that it's worthwhile for your business to spend a few $1,000s on this, you should. Like, if you can afford that, you definitely should do that. I would be nervous about going to your local business attorney though, because privacy law is such a specialized field. A lot of business attorneys don't know enough about it. But, if you wanted to test your attorney to see if they knew enough about it, you would ask them, what are the privacy laws that apply to my website and why? And what is your strategy for keeping my privacy policy up to date? So a lot of attorneys will charge you a set cost to draft a privacy policy, which is fine. But then what happens when the laws change? Are you going to be charged extra, and how much extra are you going to be charged? Usually with hiring a privacy attorney, you end up with a cost of a couple $1,000s, which might be attainable for some businesses, which is great. But, for a lot of small businesses, that's not something that you can afford to spend thousands of dollars on. And that's really who we're a solution for. We're trying to help small businesses and startups get themselves ready for these privacy laws, make sure that their website is correct, and make sure that they don't have to worry about this. So our cost is $10 a month or $100 a year for end clients. And it's something that's a pretty reasonable cost considering the amount of time and work that it takes to keep track of all these laws and update the system and all of that.
Yeah, I think it's worthwhile, and it doesn't. I don't think you have to be a web agency to appreciate it. I think people in other categories of marketing should be at least know that you're available. Obviously, some people, the type of work you do may not have anything to do with privacy, but for the most person who works, for the most people in our industry who's working with the average everyday business, you are the expert for them, when it comes to this stuff. And they don't have an attorney on retainer. So having information about this and giving this as a solution, I think is a great thing, regardless of whether you're a copywriter or a writer or a web developer or whatever. And
Yeah,
I know some
exactly.
content marketers are probably working with larger companies who have lawyers on staff and have access to that kind of thing. But for your average small business, you're a great resource, I think.
Yeah, we really hope to be. And, we have resources on how you can communicate this to your clients as well. So if you're not sure what to say, we do have resources for that. And we have blogs up that talk about like What laws require websites to have a privacy policy?
Mhm.
You know, what are the most recent bills that have been introduced? What does each state look like? You know, what are the requirements of each particular privacy law? So we have a lot of good resources, and I'm always available if you have any questions. I'm happy to answer them too.
Well, this was a very good chat. I think it's going to be a very good show. I appreciate you coming on and talking about this. We could probably go for 2 hours. Nobody wants to hear us talk for 2 hours, but never know, I might bring you back, because this is an ever evolving
Yes.
situation, and we could probably talk about terms. I don't know if that's even in your field of expertise, but that's another
Yes.
thing that
Yeah.
that we also have to think about if you're selling something on your website.
Yeah, we do terms, disclaimers, and end user license agreements too.
Well, it sounds like I'll have to bring you back on just for that topic. So
Awesome. That sounds great. I would love to. This has been really fun. Thank you so much for having me
I like
on
to
your
ask the
show.
right questions, and I don't know if I did, but I like to ask the
Oh, no, those are great.
right questions and just turn the guests loose and let them just
Yes.
fill the air with expertise. And I think that's what we did here. So I'm really, really happy with it. I can't wait to get it out and share it with everybody. Appreciate you coming on again.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for watching the show today. I hope you subscribe. I haven't been asking that question, or asking people to do that as well. My outros have been poor, so I'm trying to get better at that, Donata. But I hope you subscribe to the Copyflight YouTube channel, and we look forward to you the next time. Again, as I always say, I know things get tough sometimes. Don't give up. Don't ever give up. Never surrender. Have a nice day.